You know those borders we see on maps today? These political lines that have been drawn and redrawn over the centuries? Well, what if I told you our DNA tells a much, much older story? A story that completely ignores those lines and connects the coast of California in the US with the very tip of the Baja California Peninsula in Mexico. We're talking about a story that stretches back thousands and thousands of years. Okay, let's get into this.
So, right off the bat, the big question is, just how far back does this story go? And to answer that, you can't think in centuries or even a single millennium. Nope, we've got to rewind the clock way, way back. Get this. Over 13,000 years. Research has shown that people like the Chumash have lived continuously along the Santa Barbara Channel Islands and the mainland coast for at least that long. I mean, think about that for a second. That's a human presence that predates the Egyptian pyramids by something like 8,000 years. It's just an incredible, mind-boggling depth of time.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to journey through 5 key parts to really get this story. First, we'll look at those ancient roots. Then, we'll dive into the amazing science that unlocks this genetic past. After that, we'll compare the really unique stories of Alta and Baja California, see how that legacy is still alive today, and finally, wrap it all up with what our DNA truly reveals about us.
So first things first, how in the world do we know any of this? Well, it all comes down to this amazing field of science that pretty much acts like a genetic time machine.
And there's a name for this field, paleogenomics. It's the science of pulling these tiny shattered pieces of DNA from ancient remains. We're talking bone, teeth, and then piecing them back together to read the genetic code of people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago. It's amazing stuff. But it is not easy. Not at all. The best way to think about ancient DNA is like trying to read a book that's been left out in a storm for millennia. The pages are ripped, the ink is smeared, it's a mess. Over thousands of years, DNA just breaks down. It gets chemically beaten up, which makes it a huge challenge for scientists to read it accurately.
So how can scientists be absolutely sure they're looking at ancient DNA and not just some contamination from, a researcher's thumbprint? Well, the answer is actually in the damage itself. True ancient DNA has this unique chemical signature. If you look at this graph, you can see this characteristic spike in a specific type of mutation, but only at the very ends of the DNA fragments. This pattern is like a chemical fingerprint, a certificate of authenticity that proves without a doubt that the DNA is the real deal. It's genuinely ancient. The whole process is basically like putting together a high-tech jigsaw puzzle with millions of invisible pieces. So first, they carefully pull the DNA out. Then they build what's called a library of all these tiny fragments. After that, these super powerful machines read or sequence millions of these tiny little pieces. And finally, they use a complete human genome as a reference, kind of like the picture on the puzzle box, to map every single fragment back to where it's supposed to go.
Okay, now that we know how they do it, let's get back to what this science actually tells us about the region. And what it shows is that even within this big area we call the Californias, there were vastly different human stories playing out. It's really a tale of 2 very distinct ancient peoples. So up north, in what we now call California, you have groups like the Chumash. They were part of this vibrant, sprawling network of coastal cultures, all connected by the sea, trading, interacting for thousands of years. But then you go way, way down south to the very tip of the Baja California Peninsula, and you find the Paracu, and they were one of the most isolated populations in all of the Americas. That isolation left a really profound and unique mark on their DNA. And this wasn't just, geographic isolation. It was written directly into their genes. This quote from the research paper says the Paracu had incredibly low conditional nucleotide diversity. So what does that actually mean in plain English? It means there was way less genetic variation, less diversity within their population. And that is a classic genetic signature of a small group of people living on their own for thousands of years, with almost no genetic mixing from the outside. The fact that you have these 2 totally different stories, one of constant connection and one of extreme isolation right next to each other, well, it tells us that the settlement of the Americas wasn't some single, simple event. It was this complex tapestry of different movements. You might have had a rapid coastal highway for some groups, like the ancestors of the Chumash, and then these long-term settlements in geographic cul-de-sacs for others, like the Paracu. Okay, so that was the ancient world. But what about today? Can we still pick up on these echoes from the deep past in the DNA of people who are living in the region right now?
To find out, a massive study looked at the DNA of over 2,000 people from all across Mexico. And what they discovered about the country's maternal ancestry, that's the story passed down from mother to child through mitochondrial DNA, is just absolutely remarkable.
And here's the headline. This is the crucial takeaway. Despite centuries of colonization, of population mixing, nearly 90% of all maternal lineages in Mexico today trace directly back to the first peoples of the Americas. Let me say that again. Nearly 90%. This means the huge majority of modern Mexicans carry the maternal genetic signature of indigenous women, belonging to one of the 4 major founding lineages that first populated the continents.
And if we zoom in on just northwest Mexico, the region that includes Baja California, we see that same fundamental pattern. But you also see these subtle regional flavors. For instance, haplogroup B2 is a little more common here than in other parts of the country. It just goes to show that even within this incredible story of continuity, those unique local histories still really matter.
This, right here, is the big takeaway from all the modern data. It's just a powerful story of resilience, of continuity. The maternal genetic heritage of the original inhabitants of this land forms the very bedrock of the population today.
So, let's bring it all together. What does this whole journey, from ancient bones to modern DNA labs, truly reveal about our shared, deep history?
When you boil it all down, this genetic story shows us 4 incredible things. 1, that the human roots in the Californias are just extraordinarily deep. 2, that ancient peoples had vastly different lives, from being part of huge coastal networks to living in total isolation. 3, that this ancient maternal legacy is incredibly resilient. It's the foundation of Mexico's gene pool today. And finally, that our DNA is its own kind of history book, giving us a direct window into stories that were never, ever written down.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If this much history can be uncovered from the DNA of just one region, what forgotten histories, what incredible tales of migration, survival, and connection are hiding inside all of us?